Okay, one of the real special exhibits I wanted to show you is the Tatra exhibit they have set up this weekend. All of the Tatra cars through the years, all the way up to the last one. It's a really amazing exhibit. This is a replica according to the note on here, 1925. This is kind of a racing car. And then you have the Tatra T-57 right here, 1931, with its disc wheels. It's a very handsome Czech car. Look at the inside here. Very simple interior. The seats, so it's a neat padded dash. I like that. It's a nice touch. But this isn't really a luxury car. It's basically a standard family car. This one's 1935, but it was built from 1931 to 38, roughly. Fully restored. And it appears to be, it's a front engine, yeah. And then we have a really amazing historical thing here. The Tatra T-97. Only ever a prototype. Eric Ledvinka designed this car. And that's Hans Ledvinka's son. Ledvinka's the inventor of the Tatra, the rear engine air-cooled design. It would be really neat if they had a T-77 here, but the T-97 is a small version exhibiting the 1930s obsession with streamlining. It's really beautiful. And this was built in 1938, and here's the engine, which is air-cooled. I think it's a flat 4. And this car will run, I'm told. Not very good rear visibility. There's the rear window right there. But the history of this car is actually kind of tragic because of when it was built and where. In 1938, if you know your history, Czechoslovakia was invaded by Nazi Germany, who put a stop to this car immediately. And I read somewhere that some of these were destroyed, but I don't know. Obviously this one survived the war, and made it its way all the way to the US. The war was obviously a terrible experience for everybody in Europe. And after it was over, Tatra returns with the T-600. Tatra returned after the war with this T-600. It looks actually very similar. The body is a little bit modified. And this is a 4-cylinder. So yeah, it's a 2-liter 4-cylinder air-cooled engine in the rear. And yeah, you can't, the design similarities between this car and the T-97 are unmistakable, which is something I would never have noticed if I hadn't seen them parked right next to each other. So I guess in a way the T-97 did in fact succeed with this car. And this is 1950, when Czechoslovakia came under the control of the communist government. They managed to become independent right after the war, and then there was the communist takeover in 1948. So Tatra would have been taken over by the government. But they survived, and they made this car. And then they made probably one of their most rad cars of all, the T-603. I love the Tatra 603. It is one of the most fabulous body styles ever put on an automobile. And it looks really good. I mean, it's not just being crazy on its own. It actually is very tasteful and very pretty, but very weird. And so if you were a communist official in 1950s Czechoslovakia, you got ferried around in this in style, still rear-engined. Just look at that profile. Still the same doors, and I almost would argue that the doors on this car are the same as they are on the T-600. But that color scheme is actually common on these. I've seen that color scheme before. Let's look at the inside. Room for 3 people and seat buckles. I wonder if those are a modern edition or if they actually made them with, I doubt they made them with seat buckles in the 50s in Czechoslovakia. That's the interior. And if you look at it from this perspective, you could be forgiven for mistaking it for a, 55 Nash. The American influence is absolutely apparent here. And I just love the very tasteful chrome trim around the windows. And the rear, especially it has a split rear window. Tatra V8. CZ for Czechoslovakia. Very stunning motor car. Just the way they designed the air intake there is really pretty. Can't get close enough to it too close with the camera, or else I can't see it all. I think the top speed of this would be, maybe 95 miles per hour. Not really fast because it's so heavy, but it is very luxurious, very cozy and comfortable. Lots of leg room. But then there's like a compartment lid there because the engine's back here. All of that rear space is taken up by an engine. I can't imagine this car handled incredibly well in turns. Take a look at the front again with these incredible chrome bumpers. Well, the 603 was made until the 1970s, and it was finally replaced by this car, the 613. Now, 1974 or so, 73, 74 is when the 613 came out. I was reading, this car here is a 1976. So this is 1970s, mid-70s, Eastern Bloc luxury car. And by this time, the stagnation had set in, and the interior of this looks kind of cheap. It's kind of plasticky. The gear lever is it looks like they're going to be original seat buckles, but I can't quite tell. The seats look comfortable and they're like velour upholstery, but they don't look original. They look a little bit too perfect to be original seats, so they might have retrofitted those, which is okay. Still, you have the same chrome trim on these windows and an elongated rear because it's still rear-engined. Air-cooled V8 sits in the back of this car like a Porsche, but very long. And so that's the evolution there from about 1950s to 1970s. Really neat rear style of this car. Dual exhausts. It's a pretty neat car, the 613. It's only a 4-speed manual in this car, not even an automatic. And 118 miles per hour is the top speed, and I guess that impresses some people maybe in the Eastern Bloc, but today it's kind of slow. Here's another close-up of the dash. That horrible gear lever. That's very, very funny, but a comfortable looking back seat. And they do have the proper headrests on here, which is really nice. And then this car would evolve to the final iteration, which is this 700. Tatra 700, and that is, I was reading on the little blurb on the label, or on the placard next to this car, that by the 1990s, when this was designed, the Czechs certainly wanted to make a technological car, but 40 years of communism really kind of stagnated the economy, and they weren't able to keep up with the technology in the West. And it was saying on the placard there that it was considered in the Western market, this was considered kind of primitive, which just meaning that it just didn't have the technology. You know, it's not going to have any computerization or anything like that was starting to show up in cars. It was very basic. You can even see that it's very nicely trimmed, but even the trim is it's kind of narrow. The body of the car isn't very wide because they're reusing the same 1970s body shell, and they're just sort of updating it to this. It looks pretty rad. It's a serious looking car, but it couldn't keep up with the tech, and only about 24 were built before the company that made it, after the end of the communist era, Tatra was no longer government supported. It was no longer publicly supported. It had to go private. And though I believe they built trucks also, their car line, luxury cars by the late 90s needed to have a certain amount of spec and tech built in to fetch the high prices. And this car, unfortunately, time had run out for Tatra. And so that's the last Tatra right there. 613, the 603, the 600, T-97 and the early days, the 30s. So they lasted about 80 years. Not quite, maybe 75 years of Tatra history. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little feature. If you did, please put a like and maybe subscribe to my channel for more content. I'm working on new videos all the time. This one was definitely very interesting. I was very fascinated. Of course, I put a special thanks out there to the Lane Motor Museum for hosting this wonderful collection. But I hope to see you again soon in another video. Be well and take care. Another Tatra 613. Is this the one that's for sale? 1975. At least this one has a better gear shifter. The older 1930s. What is it, the 87?